Hey everybody. It seems after a couple days, everybody who's going to watch one of my videos has watched them. Some of you know, most of you probably don't. Somebody who I've known for a long time, although we never met in person, and somebody that you may have heard me talk to over a decade ago, died recently. And I don't know why I mention it up front because I'm not prepared to talk about it. But it has been a difficult week for me for that very reason. But now I'm here to talk about the second episode of Picard, Star Trek Picard. You know, there's a group of YouTube, pop culture commentators like Doomcock or Nerdrotic, and to some extent even the Red Letter Media guys who have made less so them than the first two, but there are many others. They've made kind of a career out of hating on, woke transformation of genre media. And so, with good reason, they joined me in hating Star Trek Discovery. Hating things like Ghostbusters 2016, although that's kind of old news. That's almost 4 years ago. Or, the more recent Terminator, what do they call it, Dark Fate, which, interestingly enough, like all the pivotal scenes are now available to watch, sort of out of context on YouTube. And I didn't see the film in the theater, like Star Wars, and I guess that's the big one. Last Jedi for me was such an insult. There was no reason whatsoever for this new one, Rise of Skywalker, to exist from my perspective. So I didn't watch it. I didn't go see it in the theater, and I may never watch it. I mean, it sounds like it was horrible. And as I say, there was just, there was no coordination, seemingly no roadmap for that trilogy. And the second film just drove the whole thing into the ground. There was really nothing left hanging. So I agree with those guys, Doomcock, Nerdrotic, that crew. But I'm liking Picard. I understand that there are problems with it. I mean, there are things I don't like about it. Star Trek was this, it presented Earth and the human future a couple centuries from now as utopian, where we left behind gross inequality, racial prejudices, even prejudices against the old. Although on Star Trek The Next Generation, there was an episode which demonstrated that, ageism, prejudice against the young certainly existed still, the very young. So Star Trek Picard is set in the alternate, Kelvin timeline, the one that J.J. Abrams started with the 2009 Star Trek film. It all, is sort of fallout from the failure of Starfleet to do the humanitarian thing and rescue the Romulans who needed rescuing when, there was a scientifically implausible disaster. But, that's the setup. And I watched the first episode. I understood that the setup was a continuation of 2009, and J.J. Abrams is not a science fiction guy. He's been hired to transform science fiction properties, but he's a feels guy. He's an emotional beats guy, and he doesn't give two shits about science. Whoops. Maybe I can bleep that out now. Basically, any video with any sort of profanity gets demonetized, but, clearly I'm not doing this for the money. So the thing I didn't like most in this second episode of Star Trek Picard was the very beginning, like the cold open before the opening credits. 14 years ago on Mars, what do they call it? Utopia Planitia shipyards. They have synthetics, androids working there, and all of the human workers at the shipyards on Mars, they treat the synthetics poorly. That doesn't seem like the Star Trek that we were given in the 60s. That doesn't seem like the Gene Roddenberry vision of the future. That is, apparently 2-3 centuries from now, people are still they have such a powerful desire to disadvantage somebody that they treat these synthetics terribly. Why? Why would they do that? Well, because the plot needs them to. But also because this show is supposed to, it is occasionally very heavy-handed in the way that it is forcing the 24th century, Earth culture to mirror early 21st century Earth culture, and particularly, Trump's America. That I don't like. But the acting is good, the music is good, everything, like even the costumes, which were horrible on Discovery, they're pretty good. I mean, they've changed them, they've updated them since the Next Generation, but that's to be expected. Uniform styles change over time. It's For me, it's a good show, and the thing that is just so demonstrative of it being a good show is that if the next episode were available, I'd watch it right now. If a whole season dropped at once, I probably would have seen the whole thing by now. Even though when a series drops all at once, I tend to, space it out. I'm usually not good for more than a couple hours watching, screen entertainment on any given day. But I'm kind of bothered by and also like the fact that the Romulans are now very, very human. There's the hot dude Romulan who's a spy, spoiler alert. There's, the undercover Romulan with her ears bobbed so she looks human. Did I mention spoiler alert? Picard has two, house servants. I don't know what you'd call them. They seem to be his maid and butler, but it turns out that the housekeeper is an ex-Tal Shiar agent. That's the Romulan secret police. And it turns out that, the secret police have a secret police. And she knows about them, and she's knowledgeable in their tricks, and some of this stuff kind of comes out of left field, like it wasn't set up properly, but the things that are working about the show are working so well, and I'm really, I wish it was next Thursday so I could watch the next episode, and that's really, for me, that's the test of it. So it seems like the get woke, go broke message has sunk in at the various corporate headquarters, where that had, the woke programming and the denigration of, maleness or traditional masculinity had been the marching orders a couple years ago. There's a lag time between they're making decisions at these corporate headquarters for the big entertainment enterprises and the time when we see that product on screen. So while we're still seeing, the ultra woke stuff, it seems to be coming to an end. Not full reverse, not overcorrection in the opposite direction. We don't need that. But, bringing it back a little bit. Like being fair, allowing the things that, Star Trek fans have longed for decades, like, more emotive acting, less stiffness in every aspect of the presentation of the story and the characters and the relationships. I mean, that stuff has all been very stiff. And I watched a video recently that explained really how that all came from the showrunner, Berman, what's his name? Rick Berman. A name that I've known for decades and that I associated with the eras of Trek that I've really liked, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. But yeah, he was kind of a dick, and his aesthetic was part of what, kept Star Trek from being better than it, it could have been. But, over time, Romulans have appeared different. Like, from my perspective, in the Next Generation era, they put, prosthetic foreheads on the Romulans. The Romulans never needed that. And yet they did that. But before that, on the original series, they didn't have anything on their foreheads. They just had the Vulcan ears. And, some of them had very severe, like, upward slanting straight eyebrows, and others had more human-looking eyebrows. And we see all of those. Like the two domestic companions, I guess I'll call them. I mean, I don't want to call them his servants. Jean-Luc Picard doesn't seem like the sort of person who would have servants. His live-in employees. I don't know. One of them has the funny-looking forehead and the other doesn't. So, we're seeing, I guess, like racial differences, physiognomic differences between different sorts, different populations of Romulans, we'll say. I like everything they're doing with the Romulans and the Borg. I think they're doing some nice world building and establishing that the Romulans not only don't use synthetics, they don't use any form of AI that is, they're basically following the Orange Catholic Bible dictate to never build a machine in the image of a human mind from Dune. It seems like the Romulans have taken that to heart, and in a very serious way, apparently. Which, as far as I can remember, it doesn't violate anything that's come before. So, if it serves a plot and it gets them talking about AI, I'm all for it. I mean, Star Trek's been talking about AI since the 60s. Nothing from the original series is particularly deep by, the state of the conversation today. But, and even really some of the stuff from the Next Generation, some of the very episodes that they're referencing in Picard, like The Measure of a Man, I think that's the one where Maddox came and wanted to take Data away and vivisect him. I mean, if Data were alive, vivisect would be the thing. But, invasively and destructively disassemble him to figure out how he works so they could make more androids. Data didn't want to go, and he resigned from Starfleet so that he wouldn't have to participate in that. And then they tried to assert that he wasn't really even a Starfleet. He wasn't a sentient being. He didn't have the right to decline, and there was a trial. And Picard was his lawyer and got to make speeches. We haven't had any really grandiose, bombastic, Shakespeare quoting Picard speeches in this yet. I have reason to believe that some are coming. But part of what a lot of the people who have been complaining about, Star Trek Picard, I mean, people like Doomcock, that's just their brand. They hate new Star Trek. They love old Star Trek. And it doesn't really matter how much Picard, shows improvement over Discovery Season 2, or how much, that there was some improvement between Seasons 1 and 2 of Discovery. It doesn't matter if it's moving in the right direction. They sort of whitewashed or painted over, the blemishes of the Star Trek that they love from the past, and they will give the new Star Trek no break at all. And I'm not on that page. JP, Egotastic Fun Time, I've talked to him on a couple of occasions for the podcast and the radio show. He and I are in agreement. Picard is good. Yeah, it's in the Kelvin timeline. It references things from the movies that we don't want to be real, but so it goes. So it goes. Something that Discovery did really, really poorly. I mean, the thing that turned me against it right away was the redesign, not only of the Klingons, but also of the Orions. Remember the Orion slave girls, the green slave girls? And then in Enterprise, we found out that they used pheromones and seduction technology to take control of their supposed masters. So if they were being sold to some non-Orion as a slave, really they were just taking a position of control over a rich man. But in Star Trek Discovery, the lush, vivid green of the Orions from all previous incarnations of them, they made them this sort of pale mint, almost blue-green. Like, how do you screw up the Orions? You just take a hot person and you paint them green, and yet Discovery managed to mess it up. So in Picard, we see some Andorrans. I don't like the Andorrans. They look so much better in Enterprise. And I guess, maybe these are just background characters, so the antennae aren't animated, and they're just, like in the old show, they're just rigid, static prosthetics stuck on the people's heads, rather than CGI or rather than, animatronic or something. But I just don't like them. I mean, the Romulans look good. The synthetics look pretty good too, I thought. Although we're not quite there yet. CGI is still more expensive than just hiring an actor and putting them in front of a camera. But eventually, we're going to get past the era where all robots look human. Because we have robots in the world today and most of them don't look human because it doesn't serve any purpose to make them look human. Industrial robots building cars or other devices in factories on assembly lines, they're basically just arms. Robotic arms that look nothing like human arms. The strength and value of a robot is completely different from the strength and value of a human being. And there's really not a lot of reason to make them in the form of humans except to satisfy, our psychological urges and, sexual urges in the case of sex robots. So, in Star Trek, the synthetics who, they're not fully sentient, seemingly. The people around them, the humans who work with them certainly don't treat them as if they are. They don't, understand humor. They are just not very lifelike in their affect. In their appearance, they're exactly human. They've got a designation tattooed on the back of their head, but otherwise they look human. And there's just no reason for them to, particularly if you're not going to treat them with respect. Even if you have some philosophical or informed technical reason to think that a human-looking and acting device doesn't really have any sort of internal life. If you're going to treat it badly, you shouldn't make it look human, because you're just, desensitizing people to bad behavior. Anyway, I'm liking Star Trek Picard so far. And, I hated Discovery, and with each J.J. Abrams, Kelvin timeline Star Trek film, I liked each one less than the one before. And I hope they don't make any more. But I like where this is going. I want to see, what happens next. And I'm looking forward to, the entrance of Seven of Nine. So, hey, Star Trek Picard, I like it. Here's a weird thing. While I was watching Star Trek Picard, they had a advertisement for Star Trek Online, a massively multiplayer role-playing game. And Leonard Nimoy was doing the voiceover. Leonard Nimoy is no more. He passed a few years ago. So is that an old recording, or is that a deep fake? I mean, what's going on? I'm really curious about that. I should probably, do some searching about it before I mention it in a video, but there it is. All right. I'll talk to you again later.